everybody, my name is Nessa Cannon. I'm a games writer and narrative designer, and my talk is called Once Upon a Time, Using Chess as a Metaphor in Game Narrative. We're going to talk a little bit about chess iconography and chess symbolism, and how you can incorporate it into your game narrative. So let's get started. So I'm a game writer and narrative designer with a little over 2 years working in the games industry, maybe about 2.5 years. I've worked on over a dozen titles as a freelancer, including Waves of Steel, Only Cans, Fitment, and a bunch of NDA stuff I can't talk about. I've also got a couple of Twine games I've thrown out there. And the thing that actually makes me qualified to give this talk is I was a chess coach and curriculum designer at a youth chess nonprofit for a couple of years before the pandemic, and I've been playing chess since I was about 3 years old. I was a competitive player when I was a kid, and I'm not anymore because it was too stressful and I can't do it. So yeah, that's me. I have a lot of feelings about chess, and I'm sorry that I'm going to subject you to them for about half an hour. So let's get started. This talk contains a hopefully brief explanation of how chess works. This talk will probably make a little bit more sense if you have some chess basics already. I'm going to try and do my best to explain how the pieces move, how the game works, to anybody who may not know. I'm going to go through some examples of symbolism in chess and how chess motifs have been utilized in various media, video games and movies mostly. I'm going to take a second and yell at you if you're planning on including a chessboard in your game to make sure that the chessboard is set up right. So I'm sorry about that in advance. And then we're going to go through a lot of various pieces of media, including The Thing, Aliens, Twin Peaks. There's a couple other things, but the main thing I'm worried about spoiling in a pretty minor way, but I still want to throw it out there, is 2019 video game Control. We're going to go through a hypothetical example of how Control could implement chess themes into their world space. So here are some chess basics. Here's a chessboard that you can see. It's a turn-based board game that ends at checkmate. It's played on a checkered 8x8 board. The horizontal rows are ranks, and the vertical rows are files. We call them this with the notation the A through H and the 1 through 8, so people can notate their moves. That's how we have chess games from hundreds of years ago. There are 6 types of pieces. There are pawns, rooks, knights, bishops, queens, and kings. And all of the pieces can be captured or removed from the board except for the king. The concept of the game is to checkmate your opponent's king, which is usually done by removing some of their pieces and threatening their king. So chess is about 1,200 years old. We're going to be talking about a lot of the symbolism that is incorporated now. I could do a whole other talk about the history of chess and what pieces used to mean and how they ended up meaning the things that they do now, but we don't have time. But it's a really interesting story, and if you're interested in chess history, it's in my opinion, it's a fun read. So let's get into some of the pieces. We've got pawns. They move forward 1 square at a time. They can never move backward. The only time that they can move more than 1 square at a time is on their very first move, when they're allowed to move 2 squares at a time. They capture pieces not by moving forward, but by moving 1 square diagonally. Pawns, there are 8 of them on the board. They always start on the 2nd and 7th rows of the board. They stand in the front of the other pieces, and for this reason, they usually symbolize the uninformed, the foot soldiers, the underdog, the powerless. Whenever you hear somebody refer to somebody else as their pawn, it's usually because they're using them for some kind of plan without their knowledge or consent. So that's why pawns are usually symbolized this way, but they're also usually categorized as maybe somebody that you wouldn't root for, that does end up becoming a protagonist or more powerful in the end, because we have a function called promotion. Since pawns can never move backwards, when they reach the opposite end of the board, the opponent's end of the board, they can promote into another piece. It's called promotion. Usually, the pawn promotes into a queen, and the reason for this is the queen is the most powerful piece on the board, as we'll get into. But there are other reasons that you might promote into a bishop, a rook, or a knight as well. This process is symbolic of long journeys, gaining power, transformation, rebirth. I would say that this is one of the most commonly motifed parts of chess. I can think of like a couple dozen examples off the top of my head. Is a pawn turning into a queen? It's usually like a young woman or feminine person who gains power throughout the narrative and ends up defeating somebody at the very end. So we'll go through that in a little bit. Next, we have rooks. They move horizontally and vertically as far as they want. They capture in the same way, so if the piece is, on a horizontal or vertical side, they can capture it. The only thing they can't do is jump over pieces, except for castling, but we don't have time for all that. They usually symbolize, because of this movement, this really fast across the board movement, they usually symbolize chariots, castles, because they literally look like a castle turret, protection, honorable duties. I usually picture them as not quite the first line of defense for a king and queen, because those are the pawns, but the rooks are right there after. Next we have knights, which is when we start getting a little wild. They move in an L shape, which is usually two squares in one direction and one square in the other, or one square in one direction and two squares in the other. I don't know why they move like this. It's an excellent question. I would love to get into it. But it's a really strange thing that a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their heads around. One of the cool things that they can do is jump over pieces. They're the only piece on the board that can jump over opponents' pieces. They capture on the square that they land on, not the square that they jump over. It's not checkers. So because of this weird movement that they have, knights often symbolize action, wildcard energy, outwitting your opponent, and then there's always the knights in shining armor, right? My favorite interpretation is kind of the wildcard energy. Whenever I picture a weird character, it's usually as a knight. And knights are usually kind of an underrated, kind of a saving grace a lot of the times that we'll go into. Bishops move on the board's diagonals. You see we've got one here that goes all the way up and down, and one that goes here all the way up and down. They capture in the same way. Since they move on the diagonals, you have one that starts on a dark square and will only ever be on dark squares. And you have one that starts on a light square that will only ever be on light squares. This makes them uniquely versatile, but also limited. If your opponent has a queen and you don't, they just always keep their queen on light squares, and you only have a dark square bishop, you're out of luck. But they do symbolize unique perspectives, confidants, quick thinking. They're close to royalty, but they're not quite there. I like to think of this piece as kind of an advisor. They sit on the other side of the king and the queen. So they usually have information to offer that might not be readily available to other characters. I like to think of them as planners, kind of, or willing to do the wild thing in the plan that'll make everything else work. Next we have queens. The queen is the most powerful piece on the board, and there's a whole history lesson that I could get into of how she ended up the most powerful on the board instead of the king, but we don't have enough time for that either. It's a really great story, though. The queen can move in any direction as far as she wants. She can move like a rook or a bishop. The only thing that she can't do is move in an L like a knight. And she can't jump over pieces. The queen symbolizes raw power, strength, femininity, sometimes in a more negative way, like controlling or manipulative. But also, with the pawn promotion, she can also symbolize accomplishment or long journeys. One of the things that I like to point out about queens is that queens are often plundered away, sacrificed on accident, or traded. Queen trades are pretty common. And the reason I like to bring this up is, unfortunately, in Western media, there's a lot of fridging of feminine characters, and that's something that I always think of when I think of queen symbolism. So, last but not least, we have the king. The king is the most important piece on the board. He's not the most powerful. He's actually one of the weakest. He's kind of a wimp, for being real. He only moves one square at a time in any direction. He cannot move into check, which is if a piece is attacking this square, he can't move into it. Kings are usually symbolic of like a stoic kind of power, weakness, old age, hidden vulnerability, like things that we keep really close to our chest, masculinity, knowledge, wisdom, rigorous planning. I like to think of the king kind of as the puppet master. Like maybe they're not directly involved in the action, but they do definitely have a big say in what's going on. So a couple more chess basics now that we've gone through the pieces. We've got the king cannot be captured. He can't be removed from the board. All the other pieces can, except for the king. When he is under attack, like when this rook is attacking, this white rook is attacking this black king, it's called check. So when a player is put in check, they have to move out of it legally. You can't just move a pawn or a rook or whatever. You have to get out of check. And there are 3 ways of getting out of check. You can capture the threatening piece, you can block, you can move. So this king's going to move out of the way. And if you can't do any of those things, it's called checkmate. So the black king here is under attack by the white queen. He can't move to the sides because it's also being guarded by the queen. He can't take her because she's guarded by the knight. So it's checkmate. Game's over. Black loses, white wins. There are other ways that the game ends, such as like draws. There's stalemate, which happens when either a legal move cannot be made or there aren't enough pieces on the board to achieve checkmate. Like if you only have a king and a bishop and your other opponent only has a king and a bishop, checkmate's never going to happen. It's a stalemate. Having pieces in the center of the board in the opening is good. This is an opening strategy. We like to control the middle of the board. That's where all the action happens. Chess games typically have an opening, a middle game, and an end game. And there's lots of different strategies for all of these different parts. But it does remind me of like acts of a story, right? That's usually it mirrors acts of a story in a very similar way. Next, we've got okay. If you're going to put a starting position chessboard in your game for whatever reason, if you just want it there because it looks cool, if you want the character or the player to be able to interact with it, neat set piece, I want you to save me some sanity and please remember how it goes. Like multi-million-dollar productions mess this up all the time. It drives me crazy. I lose a year off my life every time I see a chessboard set up wrong. So, for my sake, the bottom right corner of the board should be a white square. The queens go on their respective colors, so a white queen on a white square, a black queen on a black square. It's usually the most like messed up part of a chess set up in media. And the numbers go vertically on the ranks, the letters go horizontally on the files. It's really all you need to know, and then you got the pawns on the front, and the rooks, and the knights, and the bishop. And then you're good. You're good to go. It's really simple, and I will love you forever if you do it right in your game, because I look all the time. It's really obnoxious. I'm so sorry. So now we're going to go over some chess symbolism in media. Chess as a whole generally symbolizes a battle or war. That's kind of, that's said to be the origins of it, is that somebody wanted to recreate a battle that happened to show somebody else to see who was in the wrong. It can also represent intelligence, cunning, methodical planning, ruthlessness. There's good versus evil and an order versus chaos inherent to any two-sided board game, right? One of the things I think it's most often used for in media is power struggles. And that kind of ties into kind of a good versus evil. And if you see characters playing chess, there's often the like immediate association that they must be intelligent, which I don't think is always true, but it's almost always true in media. So that's one of my favorite representations of it. In my head, I've made up this categorization system that there are 3 main types of chess symbolism in media. There's in-universe chess iconography. There's just like maybe not necessarily playable characters or main characters, but there's different things in the background like checkered boards or NPCs that represent different chess pieces that can symbolize these themes of battle and chaos and order and everything. There are also characters representing certain pieces and things that happen to them. And there's also board setup symbolism and subtext. Sometimes all of these tie together in one property. Like, there's the Queen's Gambit that can take all of these and shove them all together because it's a chess property, right? But usually it's kind of one or two. And yeah, we're going to get into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is chess iconography. This is the most common of the three types of chess representation because of its versatility. It's kind of the broadest category, right? I tried to choose a couple of different examples in different IPs. Don't Starve's Clockwork Pieces are one of my favorite examples of this. We've got a clockwork knight, a clockwork bishop, and a clockwork rook, and they all move like their respective chess pieces. The rook moves in these aggressive straight line attacks, the bishop moves diagonally across the 2D screen, and the knight kind of bounces around like a horse would. And there are also these checkerboard set pieces, and then there are even like chess biomes, right? And to me, I remember playing the first time and immediately recognizing that there was a theme, that there's a bigger game or a bigger power struggle going on than my immediate NPC's goal to survive. There is a bigger, and that ends up like as a huge, huge part of the game, is that no matter who you're playing as, there's always Maxwell and his assistant Charlie who have something going on in a bigger sense. One of my other favorite examples is The Thing from 1982, when RJ is playing Chess Wizard and he loses, and instead of taking his loss and leaving with his drink, he pours his glass on top of the Chess Wizard to break it. And this, like, early on foreshadows his willingness to destroy the base before he would ever admit defeat to the alien, terrorizing him. We've also got Alice in Wonderland. This image is from the 2010 movie, but like in general, Alice in Wonderland adaptations really have heavy chess imagery. It's because Through the Looking Glass was originally a chess puzzle that baffled people for years and is still kind of confusing. But it's always really interesting to see different takes on it. This one is specifically in that movie. There's this big battle that happens at the end, and it is on a checkered board, and Alice represents this girl who is grown up into a more powerful figure. She's got armor and a sword and stuff. That she, takes control of her own fate, like a pawn promotion. And the fourth example I have on here is Miles Edgeworth's office in Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. And the reason for this is it's one of the most common examples of chess in media is the smart guy. You see a guy with a chessboard and you assume that he's smart, and usually that's correct. I love when it's not, though. I love when it's just somebody has a chessboard because they want to seem like they're very smart. But in it's very in character for Miles to be a chess enthusiast, so it always makes me laugh when I see the chessboard. Next, we have characters representing pieces, which is one of my favorite types of chess writing. I've got a couple of different examples here. This was a harder category to find examples for in terms of video games. I think I might just be missing things, but I've got a couple of adaptations here instead. One of my favorites is Aliens. There's a character named Bishop who crawls through a pipe to recover the dropship and return back to the queen on his side, who I would categorized as Ripley, and gets cut in half by the alien queen at the end of the movie. He's taken off the board, he's captured. And so the name is really on the nose, and I always really liked that. Twin Peaks Season 2 has a running chess plotline where Dale Cooper's former partner, Wyndham Earle, who is a chess enthusiast, sends moves to Dale to indicate who he's going to kill or what his plans are. And this has to do with a lot of queens. He does assign the women in town queen status. So, and then he threatens to kill one of them. And I believe that the notation for one of those moves is either, I think it's a bishop takes a queen, but either way, he sends a threatening letter with threatening notation, signifying that he's going to capture a queen. And Dale falls very easily into a king type of role in this situation. And Wyndham Earle is a symbolic queen and kind of Dale's opposing force, and he threatens to remove people from play, which means killing them. And I also do want to bring up the musical chess, even though it's a kind of obscure. It's not as popular as it used to be in the 80s. But most often, these characters are dressed in either black or white to signify a side. It is a Cold War drama, like a lot of chess-heavy media pieces are. So we've got the Russians, or the Eastern Europeans, in darker colors. This is Malakov, Svetlana, and Anatoly, and they are all in black. And the American characters, Walter, Florence, who is a defector to the US, Freddie, are all in white. Florence is wearing black because she ends up kind of switching sides. Anatoly has a white undershirt because he ends up switching sides. And the Arbiter, who's in a blue suit because he is a neutral party. And each of these characters does fall into chess roles. You know, you can argue that Anatoly and Freddie are both kings. The women are both queens. Polakov is definitely like a bishop. He's a plotter. And Walter, I would definitely characterize as either a bishop or a rook. And then there are other chorus characters that are pawns, and there are even these really cool interpretive dance segments of these chess games that go down and characters being removed from the board through these ballets. So that's a really cool example of characters representing chess pieces. So last but not least is chessboard subtext, which is kind of a wild concept to wrap your head around. It's the most complex of the three types, but it's usually when characters are playing a game and you can glean things that are either going to happen or have happened in the board's context. One of the most famous examples of this is in Blade Runner, which supposedly did this on accident, but they utilize a famous game called the Immortal Game, which is really appropriate for the movie's subject matter of, you know, dissecting humanity. This game is between Sebastian and Tyrell, and Roy gets involved and speaks up for this mate in one move, which is bishop to e7. King can't move here because it's guarded by the knight, can't move here because it's the bishop, can't move here because of the other knight. Can't capture this bishop, you know, he's dead. And it was a really wild game when it happened, because white sacrificed, like, I think their queen and both their rooks to be able to get to this position, and black has so much more material in terms of their pieces that it was just a really unexpected win, and it's still a really famous game to this day. The Queen's Gambit has too many examples of this for me to list because they had a chess consultant, a man named Bruce Pandolfini, on set, who had a lot of say in using historical chessboards in the scenes to represent certain events. And Kingdom Hearts 3 is kind of this, but also kind of not this, because their chessboard isn't functional. But hypothetically, it's a chessboard with 16 pieces, where two characters play at the very beginning of the video game, where each piece represents a major character being removed or positioned in a grand plan. And if I knew more about the Kingdom Hearts universe, I would be able to tell you what that cutscene means. But I have only a vague idea of how the pieces get captured and how the pieces move. But it's still one of my favorite examples, because seeing this, like, in the very beginning of the game shows a lot of how methodical these characters' plans are. It's a really instant signifier to me that there's a long game going on and the people have been planning this for a really, really long time. So we're going to move into the last part of my talk, which is talking about how Control is a cool game. I love Control. And Control has a lot of themes of synchronicity, control versus chaos, and power. And these things make it a really good example of how chess motifs could be implemented into narrative. Control doesn't have any chess motifs. I mean, not any like really overt ones. I think if I could really cherry pick a couple, maybe. But I think it's really easy to even take out the major characters one by one. Jessie, like, takes control of the. She's promoted to director the second she walks in the door, which is, symbolically promoted to a queen. Audie is a knight, Emily is a bishop, Trench is a king. Like, it's really easy for me to put together how someone could implement chess narrative into Control. So what I would like to do is I'm going to go through a chessboard that I found that you can easily assign to symbolism within the control game, and why it would be cool to have this placed as a piece of environmental storytelling. So we're going to talk about Zachariah Trench for a little bit. There's a little TLDR of his history over there on the left. But Trench was the director of the Federal Bureau of Control before the events of the actual game. His death is kind of the inciting incident of really what goes on here. He was really paranoid to close to the end of his death that this entity called Hedron was hostile, and his head of research, Casper Darling, was like obsessed with Hedron, and that pushes Trench further back into himself, and he believes that this is a threat and that the only way to solve it is to release the Hiss, which is Control's main enemy, into the oldest house, and this decision resulted in many deaths, including his own. So we're going to talk about this Smother Mate game, and Smothered Mates are where a knight comes in for checkmate when the king is completely surrounded by usually his own pieces, but sometimes other pieces, and can't do anything about it. Knight checkmates are relatively uncommon in that they don't have to be Smother Mates, but they are commonly Smother Mates because knights don't cover that much ground. They cover 8 squares of the L moves that they can make, but they don't attack in straight lines, right? They only attack the square that they can land on. So I decided to pick this 1946 game to signify Trench's fate, to signify what Trench does to himself as, before the events of the game. Director Trench is symbolized here by White's king, which is closely guarded by other pieces when Black's queen comes to e3 for check. Black has developed their pieces better, they've castled, they're generally in a better place. Maybe not, it's about the same material-wise, but Black has a better setup in what I would call probably closer to the mid-game. Black has solid control of the board, and Trench feels more and more paranoid of his surroundings and distrustful of his employees. He withdraws into himself in response to the Hiss's influence, and instead of maybe blocking with the bishop or blocking with the queen, he blocks with his knight. So the knight comes in to block this check, and like I said before, a smothered mate is when a knight checkmates a king who cannot move anywhere else because he's surrounded by his own pieces. This is really emblematic of Trench's fate because he paints himself into a corner by being so paranoid, not talking to anybody else, and then eventually releasing the Hiss into the building and initiating the lockdown sequence. The Hiss, this bad entity that is manipulating him, really pushes him into a corner using his own pieces, and is able to proverbially checkmate him. So finally, Black's knight comes to d3 for checkmate, and Trench is done. The Hiss has won. The Hiss is in the building. Trench dies shortly afterwards, and this is the catalyst for the rest of the game. And we spend a lot of the game trying to piece together what happened to Trench and what really happened to the building. We don't know what happened or how the Hiss got in or why everyone's dead. And having this checkmate position in Trench's office or as a set piece that Jessie comes across, or I think it'd be fun even if she participated in the game, figured out what the last move was, and kind of figured out what happened to Trench in the same breath, would be a good piece of foreshadowing of his fate, as he's a prominent part of Jessie's journey within the oldest house. Control is really rife with its own symbolism, and I really enjoy it. It's always struck me as a game that I could, put chess into so easily, and this is one of the millions and millions of ways that I felt like would be a good way to implement it. I wanted to go with the the Blade Runner choice with a board subtext example. In conclusion, chess iconography and imagery can be utilized in a lot of different ways to convey the themes of your game or the fates of your characters. Don't be afraid of really committing to the bit and showing off how smart your character is with their chessboard or what the villain's endgame is, because chess is a really fun way to have subtle Easter egg symbolism, because it's not, you can't immediately notice it at a glance. It takes a little bit more work to really look at and figure out what's going on. But it can also be used for more overt theme messaging, like in properties like, the thing with destroying the chess machine, or in a lot of Alice in Wonderland properties. It's really versatile. Please use chess responsibly. It's really powerful. I think that it's really underutilized, though. So, if you think that chess is the right fit for your game, you should do it because it's so much fun, and it'll add a layer to your game that might not have been there before. So, bye everybody. I'm out of time, but I've got my contact info here. I've got my website, my Twitter, and my itch.io, which is where all my Twine games live. If you want to get a hold of me and let me talk your ear off about chess a little bit more. So thanks for watching, and thanks to NarraScope for having me. And yeah, I hope everybody has a great rest of the conference.